This is 22 Hours, a Second Look, and the last episode from our original award-winning podcast that we are re-releasing with new content. At the end of this episode, you'll hear the final part of my conversation with Abigail. She shares how she felt about the prosecution of Daron Wint, whether she can forgive him, and what question she'd ask the man who killed her parents and brother. First, here's the short episode that Jack and I cut after learning that Daron's case was truly over. Here's episode 14, Appeal Denied. Hello. It has been a little while since we've talked to you guys. This is Megan Cloherty and Jack Moore.
Hi.
Coming from WTOP Studios. And we told you we'd bring you a break in the case if there was one, so we have one. We just learned today that Daron Wint has lost his appeal and he will not get a retrial. And so today, because of the circumstances we just found out, this is going to be a more informal podcast where Jack and I kind of talk about, what the decision says, what this means, maybe give a tiny bit of a recap so we can all get our heads around this thing. But Jack, the last time we were here was
when Daron Wint's defense team filed the appeal.
I don't even remember.
That was December of 2020 or January of 2021. And so kind of the basis of the appeal is a little complicated legally, but it can be boiled down to basically Daron Wint's defense attorneys wanted to call an additional witness at the trial.
Yep.
And kind of the way the trial played out is, the prosecution goes first, then the defense gets a chance to put on its case, and that's when Daron took the stand. And, of course, he blames his brothers. That was his defense. Then the prosecution gets another crack during rebuttal. And that's where they put Daron Wint on the stand and spent some time basically trying to provide an alibi for him. That's when we learned that Daron was in Gaithersburg, according to the evidence, that he was buying a pizza of his own with Garnett and having it with his kids. And also when we learned of the infamous Haters Hate video, which was uploaded to YouTube on May 13th, 2015, which is when the Savopoulos family and Vera Figueroa were taken hostage on Woodland Drive.
So basically it gave Daron an alibi that he was there and everyone remembered him being there.
Exactly. And so then after that happened, the prosecution rests its case. And in that phase of the trial, the defense has also rested its case. They wanted to call an additional witness, a woman named Abigail Williams, who lived at the house in Gaithersburg with Anthony Anderson. And she would have, her testimony, according to the grand jury, may have weakened Daron's alibi somewhat, because she testified in the grand jury that whenever Daron stopped by, he always called or texted. And the problem is, in the call records, there's no evidence, there's no calls or texts on May 13th, 2015. There is some calls and texts on May 19th. So the defense was saying, isn't it more likely that the day Daron went to Gaithersburg and watched the Haters Hate video was May 19th, 6 days after the killings? So the defense wanted to introduce this as evidence to undercut Daron's alibi. But the judge ended up saying, no, you could have called Abigail Williams during your case. And, at this point in time, the trial had been going on for almost 6 weeks, lengthy time. And, having the defense call another witness or other witnesses after the rebuttal, this would have been then a surrebuttal, which is not unheard of, but it's uncommon. And so the judge said, no, you already had your chance, and we're moving right along to closing arguments.
And Judy Pipe, who is the defense attorney, y'all will remember, she basically made the argument during all of this that was not happening in front of the jury. It was just the attorneys and the judge and us, the gallery. But she was basically saying Abigail Williams' name was on the prosecution's rebuttal list. So she thought she was going to be able to do a cross-examination against Abigail Williams, right? So she was very surprised. And again, it really doesn't make sense why she didn't call her in the first place. But that was her argument to the judge. Like, it looked like they were going to call her, so I didn't. And then she never got her chance to have her on the stand.
Exactly. And then, but the judge said no, moved along with the trial. But that became the basis for the appeal.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with HelloFresh. HelloFresh has doubled its menu to 100 options a week and offers bigger portions that will keep everyone satisfied.
And you can savor the season with the hearty fall recipes like classic beef chili or honey-glazed pork tenderloin. The best way to cook just got better. Go to HelloFresh.com/nightmares10FM now to get 10 free meals and a free breakfast for life. One per box with active subscription. Free meals applied to discount on first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. That's HelloFresh.com/nightmares10FM to get 10 free meals and a free breakfast for life.
In the oral arguments before D.C. Court of Appeals, which is the district's highest court for local matters, not federal cases or federal trials, the oral arguments were in March of this year. And those are interesting to watch, but, kind of at a higher level. They're highly legalistic and, it's just the judges and the lawyers arguing, kind of arcane points of law. So watching those, it was hard for us to figure out which way they're swaying. We don't know. We can't figure out some of the time what they're even arguing about. But and then you wait after that point.
For a long time, by the way.
Exactly. The Court of Appeals, has a lengthy caseload, and sometimes it can be a year or more after they hear oral arguments to when they issue an opinion. And the only way to really know is there's a website where they post all of their opinions, and you just have to go there and periodically visit and refresh the page and see if anything has popped up, which is exactly what happened today.
Wait, and you guys know Jack did this, of course, our detail-oriented superstar here. So you double-checked, and it came down today, and this is about noonish, right?
Yeah.
And so we're going to get into a little bit of what the decision says because it is kind of legalese, but also we want to really give you guys a sense for the panel's wording on their decision. So what was interesting to me, Jack, was that in denying him the appeal, they also acknowledged that he should have been able to have, or Judy Pipe should have been able to have a rebuttal.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's kind of two different parts to the decision. So they say, no new trial, but
the court kind of did err, if you will, when it came to this. Let's pull the quote. I think there's a quote in the very top.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wait, hold on.
Okay, so maybe this is a good place to take a break while we find that.
This podcast is sponsored in part by Aura Frames. Do you find yourself needing a pick-me-up in the middle of the day, or maybe when you're about to head into a meeting or make a call you'd rather not make? We all do. And for me, Aura is an easy pick-me-up that works every time. Seeing a short video of my nephews when they were toddlers, or my parents dancing, or a photo from my wedding brings a smile to my face and reminds me of why I'm working so hard. I have a digital frame at home, and I've gifted one as well because of that happy feeling it constantly delivers. Aura frames hold unlimited free photos and videos. You just download the Aura app and then connect it to Wi-Fi. You can preload photos if you want to give it as a gift, and then they can send photos to the frame straight from their phones. You can't wrap togetherness, but this holiday, you can frame it. For a limited time, visit auraframes.com and get $45 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code NIGHTMARES at checkout. That's AURA frames.com, promo code NIGHTMARES. This exclusive Black Friday Cyber Monday deal is their best of the year, so order now before it ends. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout.
Welcome back, guys. So we found the exact quote we wanted to pull for you from the Court of Appeals decision. It said, quote, "The weight of other overwhelming evidence against the appellant," which is Wint, "rendered any error by the trial court in denying rebuttal harmless." And what is that evidence, just to remind people?
So there is the DNA on the crust of the half-eaten pizza, Domino's pizza, that was delivered to the house while the victims were being held hostage. Right. There's the DNA on the construction vest found in Amy Savopoulos' burned-out Porsche. Mm-hmm. There is a hair found upstairs in the bedding in the bedroom where the victims were restrained and held hostage. And then there's a hair found in the hard hat in the garage. And then there's also the kind of incriminating searches on his phone.
Right.
Searches for the crime, the fire on Woodland Drive, and then things like, hideout cities for fugitives, how to beat a lie detector. So that was, kind of the evidence that they call overwhelming. That was some of the evidence they cited.
And the dark time when Daron's phone had no activity at all because it had to be connected to Wi-Fi, and it happened to be during the time of the murders. And it's interesting because this thing is about 40 pages, the decision, and they really do synopsize the trial for us. I mean, we could have used this.
Yeah, so in going back to that idea of there kind of like two ideas here, they do, really seem to come down on the idea that the defense should have had the chance for a sur rebuttal. They disagree. For example, one of the reasons why the judge denied the chance for a sur rebuttal was that Ikea Williams' testimony was equivocal, meaning it wasn't, it was kind of maybe, sorta, and
it wasn't a smoking gun, essentially.
Exactly. And the appeals court says, we disagree that Williams was too, quote, equivocal for her testimony to squarely meet and question the Gaithersburg alibi. Williams' testimony made it less probable that Darrell had visited Gaithersburg on May 13th. This evidence should have gone to the jury. But, then on the other hand, they say, so the jury should have heard this. That's true. But on the other hand, look at all of this other evidence.
It wouldn't have made the difference, essentially.
Exactly.
So now that Daron Wint knows that this is over, where is he now, and is this the end for him?
So I think at last check, he is in a federal prison in Illinois. And I think, in terms of the appeals process, this was the kind of the major route, the major avenue for an appeal. And this is now over. I think for prisoners, for people convicted of crimes, there are other kinds of post-conviction appeals that can happen over the years. But this, kind of is the main avenue right out of the gate to get a new trial, has been totally shot down.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Quince. Step into the holiday season with layers made to feel good, look polished, and last from Quince. Perfect for gifting or keeping for yourself. Go to quince.com/nightmares for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada, too. That's QUINCE.com/nightmares to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/nightmares.
It's a case that really dominated so many lives, obviously including the victims and their families, but the Wints, all these reporters and people who covered it and worked on the case. So it feels like the end of a chapter. And since this is such an informal conversation, Jack, it's been a huge part of our last 4 years. We started this thing 4 years ago.
Indeed, yeah.
And you still remember almost every detail. So I just wanted to thank you. And then thank the listeners we still are getting questions and stuff every once in a while. So if you guys have any questions about this episode, we'd be happy to answer them for you if you want to email us or hit us up on Twitter. But thank you for coming along this journey with us. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for listening to our episode. Next, you'll hear from Abigail for the final part of our interview. And I am so grateful to her for taking the time and really opening up about her experience with me. We pick up our conversation talking about the trial itself.
Do you think that your family is happy with the way the prosecution handled the case in general? Do you think they're happy with the outcome?
I can't speak on how they feel. Yeah. They're their own people, but
how do you feel?
I don't know how I feel. I feel like even though it's been 10 years since it happened, it's still too soon for me to have fully, I'm trying to still process everything, but it's a lot. How do you feel?
I felt like being in there every day, it was obviously it was the most difficult story that I've ever covered because I felt very close to it.
Mm-hmm.
But we talk a lot about in the podcast about how it's not like a Law and Order episode where you see what happened and then the end, everything ties up perfectly in a bow and you know what happened. There are all these little details that don't ever come together that people have questions about. And then there's this certain legal approach to getting the outcome they want. So it may not be how you wanted to ask the question or the answer that you want to get out of that the way you'd ask that question. They had their own way to make sure that they could get this conviction. And obviously that worked. But I think there was frustration just from me, just speaking for myself, that there are so many things that we don't exactly know and we'll never know.
Yes.
And we'll never know.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll never know. 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 And And that's so hard to sit with. And I can't
It
imagine,
is.
being, yeah, you or Kat sitting with, well, why did that happen? Or why didn't you ask that question? I think that's probably
I
where
think,
I'm at.
yeah, that is with me, at least for me, that is the most difficult part. But I can't speak on if how I feel about how the prosecution handled it because I don't know about the legal proceedings. I don't know
Right.
the ins and outs of the law. I don't know those things.
Right.
And I'm very aware that that's not my strong suit. And
Right. You're
that's
not an
okay with
attorney.
me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm not an attorney. I'm not. And
I'm
so
not.
I I I can't speak on how they handled it because I'm sure they did the best they could with what they had.
Yeah. I think that,
And
go ahead.
the way the law is written. And I'm sure they did. And but it does involve me having a lot of questions and not knowing there are a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah.
But the it's just is something that I guess I'm continuing every day to learn how to live with those unanswered questions.
I think the thing that another issue, like speaking exactly to that point, the thing that they
Hmm.
don't have to tell you, they don't have to ask about, has no
Hmm.
merit on whether the conviction comes through or not, is the why.
Hmm.
Why he did this. They don't have
Yeah.
to prove why. They have to prove that
Mm-mm.
he did it. And they did
Yeah.
that. But the whole idea that this was for $40,000
Is
obviously
absurd.
is absurd. I agree. Um, I think there's a question of, initially the police were saying this had to be more than one person. Then they arrest one
Hmm.
person. And I think I've heard from other people that have been close to this case, was it just one person's good enough because we need to move this through and we have a conviction? Or do they really think it was just one person? Like things like that.
I I do think that as they had mentioned in the trial, um, regardless of if they had one person or 10, they'd all have their trials separately. So they were being tried and they're trying him not as if they didn't have the other people, but for what he did.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I'd love to know, but
Do,
I'd love to know why. But at the same time, it's something that I probably will never know.
he appealed the decision, Daron Wint, and
Hmm.
that appeal was denied. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison.
Obviously.
Do you consider life in prison justice?
Um, I don't know if they'll ever feel as though it's justice. Like there's no like that almost implies that it evens the score, and it doesn't. But I definitely don't think that he should be able to set foot outside. I think that he is dangerous, and I think that they did a good job making sure that he stayed where he needs to be so that this doesn't happen to another family.
These are difficult questions. I mean, you can tell me, "Hey, Megan,
Yeah.
I don't want to answer these questions." Um, if you could ask him something, would you ask him a question? Would you ever want to do that?
I'd ask him why.
That's what sort of sits on your
Mostly
heart.
why my brother. Hmm. But why? For all of them. Why?
Do you think that you could ever forgive him?
Forgive is a challenging word. I think that I can live my life every day without carrying the weight of hatred on my heart towards him. But I don't know if that's the same equivalent as forgiveness.
And it feels to me like it's a word kind of like grief, where it's not one thing. It's something that sort of
No.
ebbs and flows, and you meet it in different
Hmm.
places.
Like I don't allow his actions to, I don't allow the hatred, like hatred to stay in my heart towards him because that will only drag me down.
Mhm.
And he's done enough. He doesn't get that privilege of dragging me down. And so I've learned to separate that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not forgiveness necessarily, but it's, I don't know. I can't put it into a word, but I've learned to carry on through life without hatred.
And that's something,
Yeah.
like in a big way.
Hmm.
Um, Back to your family. Have you had, I think we
Sorry.
talked about this when we were talking about parenting, but have you had
Hmm.
milestones since you lost them that were like, God, really? I have to do this without them? Or, or is that like is that a turkey sandwich
Yeah.
situation where it happens every, every afternoon? Or is it, I was kind
Ah.
of wondering about the big, obviously your wedding, and
Mhm.
having your beautiful kids.
Yeah. At the wedding, my daughter was the flower girl, and my son gave me away. And so he walked me down the aisle, and he was also the ring bearer, but he walked me down the aisle, and it was so
Oh,
special. And Kat officiated, and it was magical and perfect. And it it was perfectly imperfect because everyone knew, and like the way that my family was honored made me feel so special.
well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And obviously, like
Yeah.
it perfectly
But
imperfect.
there
They
are plenty of milestones. Yeah. Like my daughter going to school and like picking her backpack and like my son wanting to drive the car and me having to like I'm cackling because I'm like you can't drive a car, you're one. And I'm cackling. I'm like I'd love to FaceTime my dad and brother and be like, look at what you've done.
look at this child. What am I supposed to do with
What?
him?
Why is he screaming at me, demanding to drive the car himself? He is one. So there's little things like that where I'm like, I'm I find that now after time it's become like moments I miss them also in those really happy moments, but in ways where I'm like, God, like and like I wish I could just really call them and not in like a I wish I could call them to vent to them. Like, but in like a I want to share this happy milestone with them. Or like I wish they could be here.
I just kind of want to meet them, frankly. I've heard so many wonderful
Yeah.
things. It's like it's just I mean, beyond the horrible things and how unfair it is, it just seems
Mhm.
like they were such wonderful, they contributed,
They
you know?
did. And they were the most generous people I've ever met. Like they donated a ton of money every year anonymously because they just wanted to help people. They didn't want the accolade for doing it. And I got to help them and watch that every year. And my mom would put on these charity events and put on these other events. And she just, my mom and dad, they loved to help people. They did. And they always, in making decisions, hoped to make the world a better place with each decision they made.
I don't even know how to, I mean, there's no way to wrap up anything like this because I feel like I
No.
could I could sit here and talk to you for 5 more hours because I find you interesting to start with. I mean, you're
Thank
so
you.
resilient, and there's so much you've been through, and you come out the other side and you're so successful. But just this huge stain on, like, the story of your life and how unfair it is. And I think there are a lot of people who are will be so happy to hear how well you're doing and how your family's
Mhm.
growing and all these things.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to share with me, or do we know if we're having a girl or a boy?
I don't know if it's a girl or boy yet. Um, but I'm very excited.
I'm excited
Yeah.
for you. Well, I'd love to stay in touch, and um, all the best to you. And thank you very much for taking the time to do this.
No. Thank you.
This podcast was originally written and produced by Jack Moore and me, Megan Cloherty, with Julia Ziegler as our content advisor. I produce the new content for 22 Hours A Second Look. Music for this episode is Haters Hate by Ramon Messam. If you like the podcast, leave us a review, and you can see the video of my interview with Abigail and learn more about this case at AmericanNightmaresPodcast.com. 22 Hours A Second Look is a production of the Gamut Podcasting Network.